Okay. Hello, everyone. Hi, Helen. Hi, Richard. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's great to be here with you. So, how are you?
Good.
Good, good. So yeah, welcome everybody to the Founders Stream. So this stream will consist of chats between startup founders and also experts in the field that these founders startups focus on. So yeah, today we have Helen and Richard with us. It's going to be really great. So I'll just give a quick overview of what this session will look like first. So we'll have about a half hour of discussion between Helen and Richard, and then after that, we'll open it up for questions from the online audience. So before we get into the discussion, why don't we introduce ourselves? So Helen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I'm Helen Kontozopoulos, and I'm the co-founder of Odea. We're a Toronto startup. We came out of the University of Toronto in 2018. My founders, Pericles Andritsos and Gal Bernard, were working on using and looking at their research on process mining and automation of customer journey mapping. And they were analyzing data and looking at how customers move through platforms. And I was running a lab that I co-founded, the Department of Computer Science Innovation Lab at the University of Toronto, and I'm also an adjunct prof. And yeah, we connected, and I was like, wow, you just pretty much automated the work I did for the last 10 years in customer analytics. And I was like, this is what I got to do now. So I still teach product dev, design, and entrepreneurship at U of T in computer science. But my full-time job is working at Odea.
Cool. Thanks, Helen. Richard, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I am the Senior Director of Data Science at Loblaw Digital. Loblaw Digital is for those unfamiliar, the e-commerce arm of Loblaw's. I hope you've used our PC Express service. I'm assuming it's much more likely that you have since COVID started, because the numbers have been going up as people have been trying to stay out of stores. I've been at LD for about a little over 2 years now. Kind of bounced around. I have more of a traditional engineering background. I did my graduate work at the University of Iowa in electrical and computer engineering. My research was on medical image analysis. And then I spent a few years doing kind of ontology mappings with natural language processing on both medical text at IBM Research and legal text at a startup called Case Text. Came to Canada by way of a startup called Figure One, which is kind of the medical imaging background. They're still around. There's actually a couple people from there who are at LD today. And yeah, it was retail was not something that I would have expected to get involved in. But when I kind of started having the conversation about probably 2.5 years ago, I sort of realized that there's a huge wealth of problems in terms of data set size and complexity of operations and complexity of customer needs. And it's just a really fertile ground for doing interesting data work.
I completely agree. Retail is very fascinating. Yeah, so I'll introduce myself quickly as well. So I'm Serena. I'm the founders stream owner at ACE, and I work on various diversity and inclusion initiatives for the group. And as for my day job, I'm a senior data scientist at Delphia, which is a fintech company based here in Toronto. Okay, so let's get into the talk. So today we're going to be talking about customer analytics, and I feel that this is one of these terms, sort of like AI. It's not really too well defined, so I think a great way to start would be to talk about what customer analytics really means to both of you. So why don't we start with Helen again?
Yeah, so yeah, I think it is one of those questions I would get. What is AI? How do you explain machine learning? And all that. And then I was like, I'd be overwhelmed because, there's so many points of views. But when it comes to the same customer analytics, I take it down to a very tactical, what I have to do, kind of like how I see and what I've had to do in the past. And that is to really understand who the customer is. So to me, it's always been, what information do I have to gather about that person I have to sell to? So, looking at marketing and sales and being in that position where I have to figure out how to sell better, how to, make better products and think about customers. So to me, analytics is understanding, how do I get to know my customer, and all the information I need to collect to understand that person. Yeah. That's how I kind of think about it.
So coming from a point of view where we're working with first-party data, it's generally our customers, and so come with sort of a product mindset point of view in terms of what's their unmet need. And I think that because we sell something that everyone needs, food, and I think we can come at it from the point of view of we know they need what we have. What is the unmet need that we can fulfill? How can we help ensure that we are the best provider of that thing that they need to buy? And so, pre-COVID, we were trying to persuade people to shop online. Now they're really, doing it in much larger numbers. But it's still, I think, the fundamental question is, what do we do to that shopping journey from a product design standpoint to make the online experience better than the offline experience? And I think that's kind of, so it's, if you see customers churning, what are the things that they have in common that suggest an unmet need in the experience, and how can we, better meet them where they are?
Cool. Yeah. So I'm curious about talking more about the business side. So you both touched on that. For example, Richard, you said that you want people to buy more things. So that's clearly a business ask. So yeah, I'm wondering, so how do you mix the needs of what the customer wants, but also what the business wants? And I'm also curious about where customer journey maps come in, because Helen, I know you work a lot on that at Odea. Yeah. So whoever wants to go first, go for it.
Yeah, go for it, Richard.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, I think that I like to believe that there's a strong intersection of what the customer needs and what we need. It's I guess yeah, and I think that a big part of the challenge is figuring out how to align customer needs with business needs, and how do we build something that serves both simultaneously? Because if you focus entirely on the business needs at the expense of the customer needs, you alienate your customers, and eventually you don't have any. And likewise, if you go the other direction, you run out of money. And so I think it's always kind of that balance. And the best possible product, you are finding that sweet spot where you're able to meet both at the same time. And so if a customer has has a bit of additional disposable income, how can we improve their quality of life by selling them kind of upmarket food? If a customer is a little bit strapped, how can we help them, get more food while perhaps, obviously own brand is always going to be higher margin. But, if we can show them the advantages of something like No Name, help them meet their needs in a way that both maximizes our, revenue and their overall experience on their budget. So I think there's always, but I think that's always kind of the challenge that we're working towards, is how do we build things that are both profitable for us, but beneficial to our customers?
Yeah, I think it's always the balance of, what the product
a little bit strapped,
and the product teams and the business teams and marketing and
I think it's
customer service and design and, creating really well balanced experiences like that everyone's kind of like, of course, businesses saying, we want to sell, product is going, the product is great, don't worry about it. Designers are like, there's something wrong going on, or there needs to be improvement. Are we really creating a better customer engagement and services? And then marketing is like trying to get all these messages to the customer. So there's a lot of voices and a lot of interests and a lot of needs that are going back and forth, and everyone's pushing and pulling. So I think that kind of question of, the customer needs, it's kind of like there's the whole organization trying to fulfill the customer, but then everybody in the organization thinks sometimes different of what the customer needs. So you'll have different teams, like the engineering team and the product team and the business team and the marketing, and they all have their own points of views of how they're fulfilling the needs of their customers. And that unified understanding of the customer journey, or the unified of that, how are they really using the products? How are they really using the services? That was the underlying thing that we try to go after, or we try to look at, the underlying processes that we have created, the reality of the person moving through your organization or your services. Like, how are they buying groceries in reality versus, I think sometimes some teams are like, no, this is how we've set it up. And then there's like this underlying reality, and I think me and Richard have talked before, and, talking about the business processes and then what's great about Richard's like work, or his perspective, is that here he is doing a business degree, like, having a business idea too, but also having the data background to say, balancing those 2 points of views, like the reality of, here's the customer really going through our product. I can see it. I can see it through the data. And then there's the business going, no, they're great. Look at our, look at what we're selling, or look at, the churn is not them. Like, like they're trying to ignore some metrics, or they're like, the metrics can't lie. But the reality is, are we designing and creating great experiences and engagements that don't lead to churn, or lead to uplift, lead to people really loving the services? So my whole answer is, there's a lot of pull between different interests and wants and perspectives that you're always trying to balance.
Yeah, so it seems like customer analytics and customer journey maps, they can really come in handy to add to a persuasive argument to get people from other teams to see your perspective and see where you're coming from. I wonder if we could maybe talk a bit more about navigating between the product team and the data science team, because at least in my experience, there's definitely this push and pull. Product wants this, DS wants this, and how do you create a unified vision? So maybe we could talk about some examples in Data, or maybe an example at Loblaw Digital of this interplay between product and data science.
Richard, you got to go into conflict for me. You got to talk.
Conflict mode.
All right. I think that the conflict is always one of a lack of understanding, and I think it's something that I have spent a lot of effort the last few years trying to minimize, and I think with quite a bit of success. I think that there's two pieces of it. One comes just from what is data science and its role in the organization, and I know that coming from a Silicon Valley background, I had one perspective on kind of the, what the maturity of data science should be. And coming into Toronto, the banks drive a lot of the culture. And I mean, obviously, fintech startups are pushing the envelope, but your traditional banks are extremely conservative. And to them, a data scientist is an analyst who knows a little bit more math. And so I think that I found that in Toronto, there were product teams who shared that perspective because they started their careers in the banks. And so there was just expanding the point of view of what data science could do. And I think that there's absolutely a role for analytical skills in product teams in evaluating whether you are building the right things. And for that, to that angle, we've really tried to push data literacy on the business and product teams to build out kind of business intelligence style tools that help facilitate dialogue. But also, as we do feature engineering, putting those feature engineering outputs into BigQuery so that when you're talking to a product team, you can start to explain, what the model actually is doing. On the other side, of course, is just the art of the possible. It's somebody without the background doesn't necessarily know, what's possible. And you have sort of a paradox because the whole ecosystem is full of, one could even say lousy with, companies flogging AI as a service to solve all your problems. And it tends to, have this, manna from heaven, magic butter, rub it on, your problems go away. And I mean, a lot of these companies, so you have people who don't fully understand how it works, who are constantly seeing pitches that smack faintly of fraud, who sometimes will engage with a company and lacking the expertise to really evaluate the expectations, feel burned because they buy something and it doesn't deliver. And so I think just kind of recalibrating the expectations and the understanding of what's actually possible actually opens a lot of doors and opens a lot of eyes. And you say, well, actually, we have enough data. We have the technology exists to be able to do really precise recommendations. We can throw away these tedious rule-based systems and actually deliver a better performance. And it applies to operations optimization problems and forecasts, as well as to customer metrics. And then there's, of course, interesting feedback loops between you take a demand forecast and customer personalization models and feed them together, and you can start to understand which customers are going to buy what, when, and why. And the technology for this exists. This is, I want to say it's not rocket science, but in a way it is. But we build rockets and we build models and they work. And so doesn't really matter. But that's, I mean, it's really been, a lot of it has just been, it's been trying to build that mutual understanding, and that in turn leads to trust. I think that if you have two teams that don't understand each other's world, don't trust each other, the data scientists feel contempt towards the product teams because they feel misunderstood and they feel like no one ever wants to build the interesting work. And the product teams look at the data scientists dismissively because they feel like the team doesn't want to build anything that actually serves the business. And it turns out that there's a lot of ways to take the interesting machine learning and computer science problems and use them to solve material concerns of our customers, and everybody kind of wins.
Yeah, we've been finding that, having, that some of the teams and some of the companies, that the tools exist, or they're, we find that a lot of the teams are using, a lot of the corporate teams that we're interacting with, starting a startup, and it's hard, we're like .ai, we're like .com wasn't available, so we're like, what do we do? We're a bit nervous about using that kind of artificial intelligence. I mean, our co-founders are data scientists and machine learning experts. So we were like, okay, cool. We can talk about the technology, and go into companies and have a little bit of discussion. Like, well, not a little bit, we can discuss the data. We could really discuss what teams are working on. And we did a lot of work before starting our company to think about the limitations of some teams using, these modelings. And one, that some of the data teams were not talking to product teams. We found a gap between that they have all these great people, but they're not working and they're always putting out fires. So we were able to find that we would be able to, create a great product that companies can use to look at customer analytics, to use the tools that, like are open, like that are there, but also use our bespoke that we're building, but be able to, create something that's repeatable. I think that was the hardest problem with a lot of the companies. So I think, one of my co-founders, he moved back from Silicon Valley after like 6-7 years there. So that's why like the mentality ever turned, like, he was like, he came here and he's like, he's used to the data scientist that he was leading, at Marvell Semiconductor, and he was leading IoT teams there, and looking at the data teams here and saying, but you can use tools, right? Like you can refine what you're working on, and you can start having a different thinking, like different perspective. So what I found is, even when companies have their data teams in Toronto, and yes, I have talked to a lot of banking data teams, and I've had to do it before in the, in when I had the lab. The biggest thing was not being able to repeat, not putting out too many other fires, not being able to create a feedback loop between, after they've graded it, it's only per project issue. Being able to create robust data teams that work with your product and create that product feedback loop so that the data flows. We had a lot of companies like, we don't need you. Like, we already have data teams. And we're like, well, we refined 2 or 3 features that you think you will really need. And we've noticed companies need, because you're doing other things. One, you're getting the data prepared for us. And that's another story. That's like, maybe that's a 2 minutes from now question. How do you use the tools? How do you get data ready? But we find that, like, there's a lot of opportunities in this in this environment where there's a gap between the data team and the product team not working together, and maybe we can fill the gap. And we've been finding that we can.
Would it be possible to dig a bit deeper and give a concrete example of filling that gap, maybe from your experience with Odea, or an example at Loblaw Digital?
I could do one where we had a great health app that we worked with, and their data team, they're in San Francisco, and their data team was just, they go, we can do this. And, we can do customer journey mapping. We can do the customer segmentation. We can do this. But being able to put their fires out, they were like, 3 months later, we're still haven't hired 2 or 3 data science that has machine learning, the expertise to find those unicorns, that they were calling. I was like, okay, it's kind of hard to find those specialized needs, the specialized person. I find that, we were able to fill the gap because this has been 6 years of research. It's been, a lot of refining the algorithms, refining the work, refining also what we need to get in. And you were there to hire someone to do 2 or 3 jobs that we have pretty much done by the tools we created, by the tool we created. So I think they finally came back and said, like, we just need you to do these main things really, really well. And that's kind of how we really took off. If we honed in understanding churn, understanding journeys that lead to churn, understanding why they led to the churn, and who these people are at a deeper level, that kind of was interesting. That's what really got us going to this point. From 2018 to now, that's what really fueled the gap and the need that there's in these large organizations. This was a lot like a really robust, like great, startup in the Valley. But even in large organizations, that pull, like that issue that the teams are having, we were able to kind of come in and be that tool.
Interesting. So yeah, it seems like churn prediction, knowing your customer, why they join, why they leave, it's certainly a very interesting thing to know and an important problem, but a lot of data science teams, for whatever reason, they don't have someone directly working on this, or they might be failing to hire people. So in that case, I can come and fill that gap. So I'm wondering, Richard, is this similar to your experience? I know you have a really great team of data scientists at Loblaw Digital.
I mean, yeah, my mission has in fact been to, build the expertise up in-house so that we don't have as much, need for that. I think, you have a tension on really, well, 2 things, on the one hand, I think that for a lot of companies, their most valuable asset is their data. And I think when you have a small startup, you have not a lot of data and you have too small of a team to really worry too much about things like governance. And so I think for a small startup, I remember from, when I was at Casetext and we were 6 of us, we were using dozens of third parties for all sorts of little things that we didn't have the bandwidth to hire for. When you get a little bit larger and you start to look at your data as a strategic asset, there is that question of how can we minimize how much we're sharing it with third parties. And then, of course, the last kind of, tail end of any innovation cycle is always commodification. So, as people come up with new ways of doing this, a lot of this technology, things like churn prediction and customer lifetime value, there is always new innovation happening on those things, but there's also a lot of really just robust off-the-shelf tooling for it. And I think that what I have found at the scale that Loblaws is at is that when you engage with third parties, you often, to the story that, Helen was talking about, the biggest lift is just getting the data into a position where the third party can work on it. And once you've solved that, the problem is straightforward. And so my argument has always been, if we have to solve this problem, let's actually get our data house in order. Let's actually solve all of these housekeeping problems. And the key to the hiring is making sure you have somebody in a leadership role with the background of the people you're trying to hire. And if you have that, they'll know what to look for. They'll know how to interview the people. They'll know how to make sure that they have a kind of an interesting environment to work on. I think that companies struggle when they don't have anybody in leadership with a data science background. And so they go out and either they hire the wrong people, which it's easy to do in a hot field. There's a lot of people with 60-day diplomas and very little depth to their background. And if you don't have the background, you can't necessarily differentiate between those and people with expertise. And the fact that the people who are really good are expensive and they're demanding about their workplace. And so they can tell that they're going to be walking into a place where they're not going to have kind of a network of colleagues to interact with and kind of grow with. And I think that if you can solve that, and if your business and your problems are big enough to justify spending on that, it's a straightforward thing. And I think there's always going to be, but there is kind of that threshold in a company's growth where you start to be thinking about, how can you strategically bring things in? I think that when we're looking at what I personally, I can't speak for everyone in the company, what I personally am looking at third parties and thinking about their technology, I'm always asking, well, can we license your IP and bring it in-house? Because I view the data as a key strategic asset, don't want to be sharing it. But also at times when somebody has done the hard work of commodifying a solution to a hard problem, you don't want to reinvent that wheel. You want to start with something off the shelf and then say, okay, if we actually need to improve or we think we can improve, then we can do our own thing. But there's no reason to be building our own thing that only gets 80% of the way to something that we can just buy.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
been
that makes
kind of,
sense.
yeah. And then that whole data part, I think we went, because we worked with, we were working with and we still are, with a pharmaceutical company. We had to go through 6 months of security, a huge security audit. And that, I think, as a very early startup, really put us in a position where, we did 6 months. We had to go through 2 of them, through 2 pharma companies. And the amount of scrutiny we went through was crazy, and that got us ready to deal with, what Richard said, like, how are you, like, we need to make sure our data is, it's our huge commodity. It needs to be secure. It needs to be thinking about it. So it was really amazing to have to go through that, because then we had to structurally change our product, like how we thought about how our product is, how data flowed. We had to think about, we set up a lot of security because we couldn't even go through the audit if you didn't do all this, right? So I think there was, I working with now with a lot of groups of talking about how we can train more startups, third party in a Canadian ecosystem, to think about how to be able to get their data, to be able to use their platforms in a very secure way, and to say, look, you can give us data, talk about encryption, fully homomorphic encryption, talking about, because the only way we can start working with large companies like Loblaws and working with is to really think about security of data, and also encryption, privacy, of course. I mean, for me, privacy by design was easy, because I had Ann Kavukian come to one of my conferences in 2014, and talk about IoT and privacy, and and I knew she needed to talk right away. I was like, I need this person. She's the leader in this. And that was 2014. I don't even know what year we're in now, 6 years later or something. It's been a long time now, and I think about it. And it's, to be able to work with a large company is to say, we have built a lot. We've built something that you don't need to, or are working on building, and we can just plug into your other solutions. And that's for us as a scalability issue, as a startup, of course, to be able to just get in and work, right? But then the biggest problem for us was, how do we talk to their teams about data entry and getting it ready? What does the data warehouse look like? These are not data lakes, they're data swamps a lot of times. And it's like, ew. They're really gross. They're like data swamps. We're like, wow. And they're like, we've got lots of data. We've got a lot, it's like multiple year. And then just recently we're like, oh, but you changed every question every year because your marketing team was asking different questions every year. So it's not going to be standardized. It's not the same questions. Some years they're not asking this question, and then the next question, there's a lot of challenges when it comes to, getting clear visions and clear understanding of customers. Who is this person? But then you haven't been collecting. So I think, Richard, I bet you can totally talk about what it means to get into an organization now and have had lots of data in the past, and now what's the vision of data in the future?
Yeah, there's a lot of
that data stream,
Yeah, there's a lot of great questions that are coming in online that are talking about this sort of product data science, which I would love to get to, but I would also love to quickly, or not even quickly, talk about what's on everybody's mind right now, which is COVID-19. This is what everybody thinks about. We're all stuck at home, social distancing, washing our hands, wearing masks, being careful. And it certainly changed our lives quite a bit. And I would really like to talk about how it has changed things right now. So for both of your companies, so at Loblaw Digital, also for Odea, just to give an example, to be completely frank, I went onto the Loblaw Digital or Loblaw site one time, and I was trying to buy seaweed. Seaweed was unavailable, and I was recommended pizza. And to me, they are not in the same category. One is an Asian food, one is let's say a Western food. And I just thought there's something up with their product substitution model. And then I was really curious to hear, Richard, when you had mentioned to me that you said product substitution now because of COVID-19, it's now something that's like now the product team is asking for it. So I think can you clarify that?
I'm intrigued by your anecdote because I feel as though so the substitution was, oh, I see, at pickup time.
Yeah, it was like, if this item isn't available, or if this item isn't available, will you accept pizza? And I was like,
it
no.
Was presented in
Yes.
the website?
No.
Was it presented
Yeah,
in
it
the
showed up on the website, yeah.
I'm fairly certain that we had nothing to do with that, and I'm sorry that happened.
No worries. But I'm just using it as an example of, let's say right now, a lot of people are going to be needing product substitutions because, let's say, toilet paper is always out, or maybe toilet paper, one particular brand, is always out. So is that an example of something that's changed immediately due to COVID-19? Is there a need for these product substitution models that maybe weren't asked for before?
I mean, I guess a product substitution model, I think use cases fall into two categories. And one is kind of the upsell, the experience enhancement model. So we had a pilot of a substitution model out for a while, and I think it's going to at some point probably get revived, but it showed you PC, President's Choice, and no-name brand substitutions for things in your basket. Either as an opportunity to save money, or as an opportunity to experience how great PC is. And that, that type of thing follows the track of how can you just enrich a customer's life. And you can go other directions with that. You could offer just pure upsells. You could offer variations to, introduce a customer to a wider breadth of assortment. And that's certainly stuff that we were talking about pre-COVID in terms of enhancing the journey. The other is papering over an operational problem, which is where you came into the pizza versus seaweed thing. And the latter is unfortunately the version that's become a little bit, more important with COVID, because things that are, selling out, it also just with the increased demand for the online orders, you can increase efficiency, if you have it's hard to scale up. The challenges of scaling up increase the wider your assortment. And we do have some, various, plans in place to kind of deal with that problem. But it does mean that your odds of needing to substitute go up. And so, we are looking at making that available both to the pickers, so that the pickers, if they have only been with the store for a week, they don't have to know enough about the assortment to make a good substitution, so that we can personalize them, so that we you have a brand preference, or you frequently substitute between frozen and fresh on some particular SKU. That flexibility is baked into the model. And then there's also just allowing you to choose your sub at checkout time of what would be chosen if it was unavailable. My suspicion is that your experience was put together without data science by a product team that attempted to do a quick mapping from a poll based on category labels, and sometimes they're a little bit imperfect. But that's it's a challenging thing, because your substitutions are going to only be as good as your product data. And I know that when we were first, trying to apply an ML-based substitution model, we were looking at the images at one point, because of the fact that the textual metadata wasn't everything we wanted it to be. And the images improve the accuracy, but then the images also can produce, odd and embarrassing things that you can search for Google or search on Google for examples of them. A colleague of mine used to like to show everyone an example that she had found, which was where Instacart, not us, which was not our algorithm, would offer corn dogs as a substitution for tampons, because the images had them having a similar shape. And so it's, you have to be cautious with so embarrassments are inevitable if you don't have some good quality controls on it. I think for us, scale has been kind of the big issue. First, how do we scale the website, which was actually kind of exciting because it gave us a license to build up technological improvements that had been hard to prioritize in the past, because suddenly we just had so much traffic. And we've largely solved that, which is great. And now we're kind of looking at the operational side. How do we make sure we can fulfill more orders? Right now, you may notice that there is we have several day lead times, which makes the substitution engine less important because 7 days out, there's a lot of uncertainty in what will or won't be available. So asking you to choose a different type of pizza if your frozen pizza is not available may not matter if neither is available. And so it ends up creating a bad customer experience. And so right now, we're thinking about how do we improve visibility for the customer on what's actually available, but also how do we shrink those lead times so that that information is meaningful. And I think so it's a big kind of a multifaceted problem. It's exciting for me because it takes a lot of problems where data science is in fact the right solution and puts them top of line. And so it's all of a sudden created a universe where we have a lot of demand, and we're trying to figure out, what's the best way to structure our approaches at a kind of high, business level to make sure that the data science solutions will be as effective as possible.
And Helen, what about you? What have you seen change? Or we could also talk about what you see might change in the future. On our coordination call, we did talk about this idea of subscription models becoming a lot more popular. So I was wondering if you could speak to that as well.
Yeah, I think it was Richard who talked about subscription models needing to change. That it becomes from past experiences that it was something that you might go into a different business model you might choose to do, and now because of the change in customer behavior, it's something that might in the future become a normal to have something just come into your home continuously. Also, that it might help operations. It might have starting to use, say, subscription models might be something that might be a regular thing where you have Amazon doing this. What really saved me is I still get toilet paper and paper because my subscription model just was on continuous, so I think it was at an operation level, I'm not even thinking and it just arrives, and I'm getting, I got Tide today and some other, other things. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that, and we needed it because we're running out. So I think it's kind of like that ability to work with an organization, say to work with Loblaws or to work with companies to start saying, okay, how do you start helping people who are living at home and what they will need so the customer change. So for us, being able to work with companies now to look at their e-commerce sites, setting up e-commerce quickly, what kind of customer engagements are they having. So we found an opportunity there that now you have to create e-commerce sites. You have to create Shopify stores. You've got to do this. So data will come in. So we're working with what now, how do you make it better? Before it was just a store that now you have to expand in. Now it's oh wow, we didn't have an online store. We are creating. So Lindt was creating, they had to straight away get on board and start creating, selling their chocolate now on an online store. No one's going to their stores. So, but now they have to optimize. They weren't working on optimizing, and then creating better engagements and all that kind of online. That's not what they were working on. Another thing is no face-to-face selling, right? So we work with a lot of B2B sales. So people would want to know about their customer. And now your sales rep can't go to you and be face-to-face and talk to them. So how will you work on your messaging that used to be, you could just call them up and say, hey, let's talk. Now you don't do that. So now they've been using us to integrate their CRM systems, but also sales information and also other social media. So taking 2 or 3 data sets and using us to say, how do we target better? Because now we can't do it face-to-face. What's the next best action I can take? So should it be email or should it be an information deck? What should I do? So the propensity of that customer or customer and the client or, to be more open to what method do people really want to be talked to? And I think there was also people didn't want to be sold face-to-face in these certain industries. So now we're able to fill again that gap where that salesperson is able to make a better educated guess. Now it's not a guess, it's a necessity. You can't be there in front of the person. So what do you do? So e-commerce changes and also selling. Sales changes and empowering the salesperson to now say, I've lost that, intuition. They would say, well, I use my intuition when I talk to the person, like
Right.
now there's no intuition. Now it's like the person, you can't get that intuition that you used to. Maybe a phone call, the question is, are people getting on phone calls? I mean, are they getting on Zoom calls more? I don't know. So there's a lot of, and now we're talking about thousands of people that you're talking to. So there's a little bit of transition there between sales and commerce. Yeah, totally. Sales is there's an opportunity for us, at least, we found.
Yeah, I have a question that I want to just bring up before we get to the questions from the audience. So I'm also wondering how our use of the data from this current period right now will change compared to what we would have done previously. So we have all of this customer behavior data that might not actually be representative of how people actually act. I mean, people are in a panic. So when we're building models, maybe let's say a few years down the road, do we just leave out 2020, or do we pre-process 2020's data differently, or will people's behavior actually have changed substantially so that we actually cut out everything 2020 prior? We just use 2020 onwards. So I'm wondering if either of you have thought about that, or just like you're leaving it to later.
It's already something that has come up in a very big way in terms of demand forecasting and propensity analysis. Where you see that a lot of the information that was in the pre-COVID data just doesn't apply. And so I think that right now the team has been kind of trying to figure out how can we continue to use that older data to inform a model that is aware of the universe we live in today, because of course 30 days of data makes for a crap demand forecast. But demand forecast data for a completely different universe is also not strictly applicable. And so those types of things have come up, and how do we adapt our approach to still end up with the models? I think you're going to see, I think, it'll be useful. We'll figure out ways of blending it, but I think there's going to be this kind of blip of inaccuracy while we figure out how to stitch together the new and the old universe.
Yeah, it's been completely, for us, it's, of course, because now the behaviors, the wants, the changes online, there was already a move toward no face-to-face contact because of policies and things in industries we were working in. So there was already a trend of that. So we were already thinking about the trend, but we were thinking about it in 2 years from now. So we were already thinking about how to start having communications with customers, like how do we start thinking about communication without a human, right? Bots, educational seminars, like there's still human to human contact, but there's more like, is it more seminars like this? Is there more, like what kind of, more event-based? Like we had to start thinking, but we're like thinking 2 years from now, like we're thinking that's like, we're seeing a trend that there was less face-to-face sales happening. So now it's now a priority, and I think that's where the subscription models were thinking, now it's a priority, that, something that we were thinking about that will happen 2 years from now. It's a trend we were already looking at. We saw in the data that it was something that was happening. Of course, it was a sentiment analysis too. I don't want to be contacted. I don't want to be contacted. I don't want to be contacted. Like how many times in the drop down do you have to see that where you're going to say, I think they don't want to be contacted. So now how do we contact the way they want to be contacted? So instead of just the drop down saying, I don't want to be contacted, the question is, how do you want to be contacted? Is it just a bot? Is it beyond the text, beyond a mobile text? Like, is it a tweet? Is it like how we are in the age? I feel we're now pushed more into the age of creativity. We have to think of creative ways of now having communications with our customers. And this is a communication issue. This has never been just a bot. No, that's a bot that's having communication. This is a communication that you are communicating with us when you saw, what was it, seaweed versus pizza. This is communication. This is an issue of how we're speaking to you, right? Eventually it is a sale, but I'm so happy I took an undergrad in humanities and took communications. I did 2 years of communication studies too. I did anthropology, but I'm happy that I realized, hey, Marshall McLuhan, Toronto, this is the home of mediums and messages. this is what we're trying to do, is try to create, better experiences, but this is a communication of an experience, So I think there's a lot of great opportunities for us to really start thinking complexity of how people are changing, but the fundamentals of needing toilet paper and hair color, I wasn't surprised by that. I don't know who was surprised by people needing, like, panic that they won't be able to get toilet paper, maybe someplace. Now they're trying to return it and people are saying no. So I don't know if Loblaw is like allowing returns of toilet paper. I know Costco isn't. So,
Yeah, they put their foot down.
yeah, they're like, no,
Yeah. Okay, great. So I'd say let's move to questions from the audience. How does that sound to both of you? Yeah, there's some really good ones coming in. So we have about, I think it's about 5 questions. Let's see if we can get through all of them. I would love to. So one of you can answer them, or both of you can if you want. Feel free to pass if you would like to pass. So I'll just read them in the order that they came in. Okay, so first one says that so this is relating to what the product team wants, what the data science team wants. So this question says there is this push and pull that occurs between what the customer actually wants and what the product team then decides to implement. So if you do what people want, you will end up with so many product features that can be very overwhelming for the engineering team, data science team, and also for the customer. So then how do you go about deciding what features are right among everything that people are asking for? And can you possibly give a concrete example of a time that you did have to make this decision?
Richard, I'm leaving it up to you. I don't want to deal with that one. Because I have to deal with it every day. That's why.
And I think actually that I feel like you have to answer this one because you are probably far more in the product hot seat than I am on this. So I feel like
the hot seat it is. I think there's a great book, the Lean Customer. Is that the Lean Customer? Oh, what is it called? I can look behind me. To be able to start, I think you said it, Serena, it's what they say they want versus what they really do, right? And then to be able to really get to understanding the really value proposition and the need that's really taking care of the discomfort and the wants and the of the customer. I think sometimes the face value of what a customer is saying, I'd love this, and I want this, and I do this, and and the question is, are we really getting to the heart of the problem? And is this really moving? Are we becoming just a one feature company, or are we really solving a deep problem? And we always had customers, and going through pilot phase in the last 2 years, it's like, oh, build this shiny thing here, and build this, and this is what's this is what's possible. Can you do this? And we're always being pulled into different directions, and sometimes the core of the need has to be honed in. So I think the product team does get pulled, but then I think at a leadership level, as co-founders and as we are a team of experts. Like, this is my co-founder's 3rd startup. So he has had this before, where you get pulled in one direction and you waste a lot of resources, and you can't do that. I think honing into truly what is repeatable and what people are really wanting and asking for over and over again needs to be in front of customers, multiple customers, and doing a lot of A/B testing, using a lean startup kind of mentality of really seeing a pattern. And hey, if they keep on paying for it, that's what we're going to build. So I think the money speaks for it when they keep on putting down money and saying this is what we really want, and that's what we've really fine-tuned.
So one question, if you don't mind me interrupting, that
totally
actually flows nicely into what you were just talking about. So the question asks about churn prediction, and specifically if there are opportunities to combine data science with other methods such as focus groups. So you mentioned like asking the customers what they want. So would you ever combine analytics with focus groups for churn prediction specifically?
We do. I mean, if the data is there, it depends. But really, because we're looking at underlying processes that have already been created. So we're looking at what people are doing through every touch point. If there's a sentiment analysis that comes on top, like a focus group, I find it's a qualitative layer on top of a sentiment that might be connected to a certain segment that might continuously come up. So that kind of second or third data that, if it's first data, I think it's a layer of sentiment that comes on top of something. But again, we present what the data is saying. We're visualizing what the data is saying. We're seeing process, like we're seeing what touch points were the most important that created the sentiment. We're putting as much information the teams are, but this is where the marketing and sales teams bring their expertise, and where they're the layer on top of us that really understand and say, oh, because we are not the experts, say, in their field, that they can come in and say, oh, wow, I didn't know this was happening over and over again. And we have made changes, companies have made changes because they have discovered things in the data that we have shown them. And they said, we didn't even know people were churning because of this reason. Or they said, oh, wait a minute, this is what's happening at a, say, regulatory issue or something that happened in the government, and this is why someone's churning. Or like they were able to find. So that human in the loop and the human on top expert is what we always need for us, like to be able to look at the data and find that they did find something in the qualitative, but also the quantitative is there to show them what's happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. Richard, do you want to add anything? Or if not, I have a question to ask you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, combining data, like focus groups, you're going to have such sparse data points. What you can do is take like customer survey data, where you have several thousand of those alongside all of your shopping history, and kind of start to try and map people who are happy versus sad versus unsolved problems. And then if you go and actually do some interviews, you can ask kind of those follow-up questions, get a full 60-minute, deep dive understanding of who is this person who is very happy, who is this person who is very unhappy. And it ends up being kind of a customer-led brainstorming session. But it's at the end of the day, yeah, you're searching for the unmet need, which the customer may not always explicitly confess to you.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Okay, so Richard, question for you. Also, I'm trying to be mindful of everybody's time. We don't have that much time left, but I would love to get through all the questions. So let's see if that's possible. So this question is about delivery or product delivery. So the ACE member asks, so customer segmentation with past purchase patterns definitely helps in making better recommendations. And they're asking, how are online retail organizations trying to improve their product delivery in order to stay competitive with everybody who has these digital product offerings?
You mean actual grocery delivery, or you just mean delivery in the abstract sense of a product to market?
I'm thinking actual delivery.
All right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of companies trying to do it. I think that at the end of the day, I am of the belief that the two most important things when it comes to grocery delivery are the assortment that you can shop and the ability to actually get it delivered to you in a timely fashion on a reliable kind of a window. Like, if you solve those two problems, very little else matters. Well, price matters, but and I think that's really that's the focus. And I think that you are seeing what's interesting right now is that the marketplace is getting crowded with other upstarts. Cisco recently launched an online grocery service for individuals, fulfilled out of I think Mississauga and Peterborough and Oakville, or like wherever they have their warehouse.
Cisco? Like Cisco says, well, fair enough.
SYSCO, not CISCO.
Oh, right, Cisco. Yeah, okay, good. I was going to say, like,
not network equipment company.
Yeah.
And if you poke around on there, it's interesting because I feel like you're kind of taking a peek behind the curtain of casual dining. Like, you can buy, a pallet of, 40 strip steaks ready to go, or the frozen pizza that you probably find at some chain restaurant in Toronto. These kinds of things, and it's what COVID has done is created a situation where a lot of supply chains are suddenly looking for a new market. And I think it is going to, in China, China's the country, I think, with the largest online grocery penetration in the world. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the last time I looked at a report, I want to say it was like 25-30% market penetration for online grocery over there. and this is pre-COVID. I don't think, and I think that the rest of the world lags way behind. North America, it's traditionally been in the single digits, and that's suddenly going to change. And I think that we may very well end up seeing kind of a multiplicity of offerings that segment, the overall market out based on what people want. And, we may have 2 or 3 things that customers really like, and maybe some people will decide that they want to treat Cisco as like going to Costco, except it gets delivered, and these other types of. So I think, but at the end of the day, like for us, the focus is how can we basically deliver the in-store assortment to a customer where they can get their groceries within 48 hours. And I think that's kind of the central value proposition. And if we succeed at that, I think that we've built something that Canadians will find very attractive.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thanks so much for that. So there are 2 more questions, but I think we could not answer those right now. But what I'm thinking I'll do is I'll send you both an email later asking you just your thoughts, and then I'll message the 2 people on Slack who we missed so that you can still get answers to your questions. But yeah, thanks so much for this chat. Do you have any final comments you would like to add?
No, thank you, Serena. No, thanks for inviting me. This is great. Yeah, it's always great to talk to Richard.
Yeah, great to talk to both of you, always.
Likewise.
Yeah, I hope everyone, just like a message to, I just hope everyone's okay. And, it's really hard around this time. I think it's hard to be working from home, but for the ones who are not working from home, to stay safe, and, the ones who are, so I think Canada's done a pretty good job, and we're pretty nice people. I think I realize in comparison to what's going on. But yeah, I just want everyone to stay safe. Yeah,
agreed. Richard, any final thoughts?
I just echo what's already been said. I think that this whole situation is not what we really want, but I think that kind of the goal here, I think, is how can we treat it as an opportunity to try and at least, make sure that some aspects of life are better when we all come out of it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much. And to everybody listening or watching at home, if you have any feedback, comments, concerns, criticisms, I welcome them all. So feel free to let me know and be completely honest.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.